Here we are in Dartmoor National Forest. We are Heath Heathercombe, and right now we're going to be talking about weeds that we can eat. So I'd really like to start off with one of the my personal favorites. Look at this prickly guy. Boy, let's not sit down on him, hey? So what we're looking at here is a giant thistle. So most of us don't want to step on them, we don't want to deal with them, and we don't want them in our yards, which is really unfortunate because this guy is chock full of nutrients for us. Chock full of iron and really quite tasty. If I was to pick this and I was to blanch it a little bit, all those little tiny spikes that would otherwise hurt me soften up and become quite edible. Now, why would we want to eat this? Really, really good for us. And this guy is a nitrogen fixer. What he's doing is he's pulling nitrogen up from the deep soil and bringing it closer to the surface. And when it dies, all those other plants around it will be capable of accessing that nitrogen. So these are actually quite good plants, and they're actually really, really tasty. So it's a weed, we don't quite like it, but it's really good for us. So maybe if we were to change our perception on what this is it a weed, is it a food plant, then perhaps we would be better capable of managing those so-called weeds on our property simply by eating them, as opposed to spraying them with a noxious herbicide or something along these lines, which actually is quite bad for us and quite bad for the environment. So let's talk about another plant that's quite good for us to eat, grows prolifically, and most people just simply don't want it in their lawns. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of bracken. Okay, so let's focus in on this guy. So this right here is what we in North America would call a raspberry bush. I think these guys are actually black raspberries. Now if we get really close, we can see there are some really ouchy spines all the way along there, which is the habit of a lot of these plants in order to protect themselves so that they can better establish themselves. Okay, so let's take a peek at the area that they're living on. Okay, this is a hillside. It's got a pretty steep slope to it. Underneath is granite. So let's for a second think about how, if none of this was here, if these guys weren't here holding the soil in, and we had really torrential downpours like we do here in Dartmoor National Forest, this hillside would potentially slide down. So these noxious weeds actually are providing two functions. They're pulling nutrients from deep in the earth, they're keeping the hillside together, and they provide us with a very tasty berry. Now, I'm not encouraging you to plant this. If you are going to plant any sort of variety of berry, raspberry, blackberry, the Scottish tayberry is quite nice, and it's thornless, but it'll have the same functions in holding a hillside together and so on. And they're quite nice to eat. So let's see. One I'd really like to talk about is a plant that's actually sort of the backing reason as to why so many people overspray their lawns with herbicides, and that would be the dandelion. So let's talk about the dandelion for a minute. Dandelion has tons of medicinal properties. If you're having issues with your kidneys or liver, it is a tonic. It will help to rinse things from your body that you shouldn't necessarily be accumulating. Really high in iron, super delicious, helps hold soil together, but most people, they don't want it in their yard because they're unsightly. This is really unfortunate. So as we all know, our bee population around the world has started to plummet, and this is quite bad, especially if you actually enjoy eating food, which I do. And I enjoy eating food that's natural food and not genetically modified. So what does that mean for me? That means I need bees. I need bees rather badly, as do most of humanity. So when we get rid of all the dandelions in our yard, those are typically, for a lot of us, the first flower that's actually going to show up in our garden. And that's bee food. So when the bees wake up, if they go dormant in your part of the world and then they wake up, they need something to eat. And dandelions fill that niche quite nice. They're really good food. And I understand it's quite a popular beverage, an alcohol beverage. In a commune that I lived in some years ago, a really good friend of mine made some very lovely dandelion wine, and it's actually a really incredible drink. Quite nice, really good tonic, and you're simply using something that's already there. The root itself can be roasted and used to make a coffee-like substance, very similar to chicory. So here we have this lovely plant that everyone is going out of their way to eradicate, and it's actually really quite useful for us. So we no longer, I think once we recognize that, some of these plant foods are very, very important, not just for us as human beings, should we choose to start eating them, but important for the environment. So like I said, this little guy, I could eat every aspect of this. Possibly not the fox poo that's sitting there, but so the leaves, I like the younger, smaller ones. They're not quite as bitter, but as we know, bitters are quite good for your stomach. They aid in digestion. I can eat the flower, I can eat the leaves, and I can eat the root underneath. This guy is helping to hold the soil together. It's accumulating nutrients for the soil. Dandelions are actually quite fabulous. If you have some growing in your yard, feel good about that. Feel good about the dandelions. Start utilizing them. Obviously, of course, make sure your dog or cat isn't using it as their bathroom. Make sure that there's nothing sprayed on it. And away you go. Please enjoy the dandelions.